There are some mornings you remember because something wonderful happened the night before, and then there are mornings you remember because you wake up terrified that the wonderful thing actually happened. The morning after I kissed, Mara Whitfield belonged firmly to the second category. I woke up at 6:41 a.m., with one arm hanging off my mattress, my phone buried somewhere beneath the blanket, and the ridiculous certainty that if I stayed completely still, I could somehow reverse the previous 12 hours. I stared at the ceiling of my apartment and tried to reconstruct the night in a way that would make it less real. Maybe the snow had confused me. Maybe the champagne had confused me. Maybe exhaustion had finally pushed my brain past the point of responsible decision-making. Maybe Mara had never actually stood in front of me on the rooftop and said what she said. Maybe she had never looked at me like that. Maybe I had never touched the side of her face. Maybe I had never leaned in. Maybe we had never kissed. Then my phone buzzed. I knew who it was before I picked it up. The first message came from Mara at 9:17. The subject line said, "Today, Ethan." The message was short, professional, and almost painfully normal. She reminded me that, for obvious reasons, we should avoid private meetings until human resources established the appropriate reporting structure. Then, as if she had suddenly remembered she was still Mara, she added one sentence about the terrible way I tied my scarf. I read it 4 times. Then, another email arrived. Reporting structure. She had already contacted HR. Priya would temporarily review my work instead of her. It was the kind of email any responsible creative director should send after kissing an employee. It was also the kind of email that made my chest tighten, because buried underneath all the formal language was one word I couldn't stop thinking about. Trust. She trusted me. Or at least she was trying very hard to make sure she still could. I put my phone down and laughed at myself. I had spent the previous 3 weeks trying not to fall in love with my boss, and now I was sitting in bed analyzing the punctuation in her email. That was when I realized something important. The kiss hadn't been the beginning. It hadn't even been the moment everything changed. The truth was much worse. Everything had started long before that night, and I had been too stubborn to admit it. 3 weeks earlier, I had been sitting alone in the office at 11:48 p.m., staring at a campaign layout that had been rejected twice. The building was almost empty. Chicago was buried under the first serious snow of the season, and every window looked like a sheet of black glass reflecting the fluorescent lights behind me. I should have gone home hours earlier. Instead, I was trying to fix a headline that Mara had called technically competent but emotionally dead. She had said it in that calm voice of hers, the voice that could destroy an idea without ever sounding cruel. Mara never raised her voice. She didn't have to. She was 31, the creative director at Haven and Lowe, and somehow she had developed the ability to make grown executives reconsider their entire vocabulary with one raised eyebrow. When I first met her, I decided she was intimidating. 6 months later, I decided she was brilliant. Somewhere after that, without asking my permission, my brain began adding another word to the list. Beautiful. I hated that word. It complicated everything. Beautiful wasn't a professional observation. Beautiful was dangerous. Beautiful made you notice things you had no business noticing, like the way someone pushed her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, or how she rubbed the bridge of her nose when a client said something ridiculous, or the fact that she never finished a cup of coffee while it was hot because she got distracted by work. That night, I heard footsteps behind me. "You're still here." I turned around. Mara stood near the entrance to the creative floor, wearing a dark blazer over a simple blouse, her laptop tucked beneath one arm. She looked tired, not weak. Mara Whitfield never looked weak, but tired enough that the sharp edges around her eyes had softened. "Apparently," I said, "apparently you are too." She glanced at the screen. "How's the campaign?" "It hates me. That's mutual," I laughed. She tried not to smile. That was the first time I realized her smile was different when nobody else was watching. It wasn't the polished expression she used in meetings. It was smaller, almost reluctant, as if she didn't quite trust herself to let it appear. "You don't need to stay late," she said. "You asked if someone could look at it again." I asked the room. I was in the room. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. Ethan. I hated the way my name sounded when she said it. Not because it was unpleasant, because it wasn't. "You've been carrying too much this month," she said. "You should sleep," says the woman who emails at 2 in the morning. "That's different." "How?" She thought about it. "I'm management. So insomnia is a leadership quality now?" Her mouth twitched. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. She turned away for a second, as though embarrassed that I'd managed to make her do it. And that was the moment something shifted. Not dramatically. There was no music, no thunder, no cinematic revelation. Just one woman laughing in an almost empty office while snow fell outside, and one man realizing that he wanted to hear that sound again. I didn't know then that Mara had already started noticing me too. I didn't know she remembered the ridiculous things I said in meetings. I didn't know she had kept the paper coffee cups I doodled on. I didn't know she had saved one sketch of a raccoon using design software, complete with the caption, "For when leadership needs caffeine and silent judgment." I certainly didn't know those stupid little things would matter later. At the time, all I knew was that I needed to go home before I did something stupid. I shut down my computer. Mara walked with me toward the elevators. We talked about nothing important: the weather, a difficult client, the possibility that half the interns were secretly designing everything in Canva. When the elevator arrived, she looked at me. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night." The doors closed between us. I stood alone in the lobby and realized I had been holding my breath. That should have been my warning. Instead, I ignored it. A week later, Denise found me staring at Mara through the glass wall of a conference room. "You have a problem," she said. I nearly jumped. "I don't have a problem. You do." "What problem?" "You look at her like she's the answer to a question you haven't asked yet." Denise had a talent for saying things I didn't want to hear. "She's my boss." "Exactly. And she's not interested." Denise stared at me. "You don't know that. I know enough. You know she's intimidating, overworked, brilliant, and emotionally constipated." "That's not a compliment." "I didn't say it was." She leaned closer. "I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm telling you to be careful." I laughed. "I am always careful." Denise looked at me for a long moment. "That's what worries me." Then came the Christmas party. And that was where everything I had carefully controlled began falling apart. The party was held on the upper floor of the building, where someone had transformed the normally sterile corporate space into something almost beautiful. Warm string lights hung across the windows. A jazz trio played near the bar. There were too many desserts, too much champagne, and a ridiculous velvet bag sitting on a table beside the entrance. I had been warned about the bag. Apparently, Haven and Lowe had an annual Christmas tradition involving mistletoe, random names, and an embarrassing amount of public teasing. I assumed it was harmless until Peter announced the rules. One name from the bag chooses the person standing beneath the mistletoe. People laughed. Someone shouted about consent forms. Mara's jaw tightened. She hated the tradition. She had tried to eliminate it for 3 years. Peter loved it. Then he reached into the bag. "Mara Whitfield." The room erupted. Mara closed her eyes for 1 second. I watched her walk toward the archway with the kind of composure people usually reserved for courtroom verdicts. Then Peter reached into the bag again. "Ethan Cole." The room went silent. I don't remember deciding to move. I only remember following her. We stopped beneath the mistletoe. Everyone expected a kiss. I could hear someone whispering, "This is incredible." Mara looked at me. Her expression was unreadable. Then she smiled. Not the professional smile, not the restrained smile from the office. The same smile I had seen at 11:48 p.m. 3 weeks earlier. "You know the rules," she said. My heart nearly stopped, but then she stepped closer, slipped something into my hand, and whispered, "Don't." I looked down. A folded piece of paper. "What is this?" I whispered. "Read it upstairs." She turned toward the room and said something loud enough for everyone to hear. "Happy?" Peter cheered. Everyone assumed she had played along. I stood there holding the paper like it contained classified information. 10 minutes later, I was on the rooftop. The city stretched beneath me in black and silver, snow falling through the light from the building. I heard the rooftop door open. Mara stepped outside. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. "You came," she said. "You told me to." "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either." She looked toward the skyline. "Ethan, I don't know what this is." "Neither do I." "That's not like you." "No, it isn't." She laughed softly. Then she looked at me. "I don't want my first kiss with you to be something they forced us to do." I forgot how to breathe. "Your first kiss with me?" I repeated. "You heard me." Snow gathered on her hair. I stepped closer, slowly enough to give her every chance to stop me. She didn't. "I want to kiss you," I said. "I know. You're still my boss. Tonight, I'm also a woman who wants you to kiss her. Tomorrow, we'll deal with everything else." I touched her cheek. Her eyes closed for half a second. Then I kissed her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't reckless. It was careful, almost uncertain, like two people standing at the edge of something neither one could see the bottom of. Then she kissed me back, and that was the moment I finally understood the terrible truth. I wasn't attracted to Mara Whitfield. I was already in love with her. The problem was that she was still my boss. She had an offer waiting in New York, and by morning we would have to live with what we'd done. When we finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine. "This changes everything," she whispered. I wanted to tell her that it already had, but I didn't. I just said, "Then tomorrow we'll figure out what everything means." We walked back inside separately. She went down first. I waited 5 minutes. Then I followed. Neither of us knew that the next morning, HR would become involved, that Mara would be forced to rethink the entire structure of our department, that a powerful investor named Martin Kell would arrive with an offer designed to pull her to New York, or that I would eventually have to stand in a conference room and tell a room full of executives that Mara's future could not be decided by whether or not she loved me. At that point, all I knew was that I had kissed the woman I had spent weeks trying not to love. And as I lay in bed the next morning, staring at her email on my phone, I realized something even more frightening. I wasn't afraid that the kiss had been a mistake. I was afraid it hadn't been. The hardest part about falling for someone isn't admitting that you want them. The hardest part is discovering that wanting them isn't enough. By Monday morning, Mara and I had become two people, pretending the rooftop had never happened, while every ordinary interaction between us felt completely different. She was still my creative director. I was still a senior designer. We still had meetings. We still argued about headlines. We still complained about clients. But now there was a secret underneath every conversation. She would walk into a conference room, glance at me for half a second, and I would remember her hand against my cheek. She would ask for a campaign update, and I would hear her voice from the rooftop instead. The strange thing was that Mara became more professional, not less. If anything, she was almost painfully formal. She stopped closing the door when we talked. She asked Priya to review my assignments. She copied HR on anything that could possibly be misunderstood. It should have reassured me. Instead, it made me realize how serious this was for her. She wasn't trying to hide what happened. She was trying to protect both of us from what could happen next. Denise, of course, noticed everything. "You two are unbearable," she told me on Tuesday. "What? You act like divorced parents sharing custody of a stapler," I almost laughed. "We're being professional. You're being ridiculous. There's an HR process." "Yes. There is also eye contact." I looked away. "We are not discussing this." "Fine. Then I'll discuss it with Mara." "Don't you dare." She smiled. There he is. The old Ethan. The one who actually cared. A few days later, Mara called me into a meeting with Peter and Martin Kell, the investor involved in the company's proposed New York expansion. Martin was the kind of man who entered a room as if someone had already handed him the deed. He shook my hand, called me young talent, and then looked at Mara. "I want to understand what's keeping Mara in Chicago." The room changed. Mara's expression barely moved, but I knew her well enough now to see the tension in her jaw. I could have stayed silent. It would have been safer. Instead, I looked at her. "Her decision isn't about me," I said. Martin raised an eyebrow. "I didn't say it was." "You didn't have to." Mara looked at me, and something passed between us. Not romance. Not exactly. It was trust. She knew I was trying to make sure nobody could later claim that she had stayed because of me. Martin leaned back. "Interesting." Mara finally spoke. "I know what I want." Peter straightened. "Mara, this isn't necessarily the time to make a decision. Actually, it is." She opened a folder. "I'm not taking the New York position." Silence. Martin's expression hardened. "You should think carefully." "I have." She slid a proposal across the table. She wanted to build the Chicago creative division. She wanted the title, the budget, and 2 senior hires before March. She wanted authority to expand the team without having to ask permission for every decision. She wanted to turn Chicago into the department everyone had been promising New York would become. Martin laughed once. "You're negotiating." "I'm always negotiating." I almost smiled. That was Mara. Even when her entire career was hanging in the balance, she was still Mara, calm, prepared, impossible to intimidate. The meeting ended 3 minutes later. She had won enough ground to continue the discussion. I returned to my desk, but before I could sit down, Mara stopped me outside her office. "Ethan," I turned. "Can we talk?" Her door remained open. 6 inches. Exactly. "Professional," she said. "Necessary." I nodded. "You handled yourself well in there." I meant what I said. "I know." She looked down for a moment. I don't want you thinking I'm staying because of you. I don't. Good. Silence. Do you? She asked. I looked at her. I want you to stay if Chicago is where you want to be. I want you to go if New York is where you want to be. I don't want to become the reason you choose one over the other. Something softened in her expression. That's what makes this difficult. What? You make it very hard not to choose you. I didn't know what to say. Mara Whitfield had never been the kind of woman who wasted words. Hearing that sentence from her felt more intimate than the kiss. She looked toward the open door. HR has a temporary solution. Priya will supervise your work through the next quarter. And after that, she hesitated. After that depends on whether you still want to have dinner with me when dinner is legally allowed to be called a date. I smiled. Mara Whitfield, are you asking me on a date in accordance with corporate compliance? I'm asking if you can wait. The teasing disappeared from her voice. Can you? I stepped closer, but stopped before crossing the line. I can wait. She smiled. Good. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her desk. She pulled out a paper coffee cup. Then another. Then another. I stared at them. They were mine. Old cups. Doodles. Notes. Ridiculous drawings. One had the raccoon. Another had a joke I'd made during a late-night deadline. You kept these? I asked. She nodded. Why? I don't know. You know. She looked embarrassed. Actually embarrassed. It was almost unbelievable. I didn't know how to make this normal, she admitted. Good, I said. I don't want normal. Her eyes met mine. Neither do I. The next 3 months were the strangest months of my life. We waited. We worked. We learned how to be around each other without touching. We learned that restraint could sometimes feel more intimate than physical contact. We went through the HR process. We kept everything transparent. We avoided private meetings. We stopped pretending our feelings didn't exist, but we also refused to let those feelings control our decisions. Mara's Chicago proposal moved forward. The company approved part of her plan. She began interviewing senior designers. I watched her rebuild the department she had nearly abandoned for New York. And slowly, I understood something about her. Mara had never really wanted New York. She had wanted what New York represented: recognition, autonomy, the chance to prove herself on a larger stage. Chicago had been the place where she had built everything from scratch. She didn't want to run away from it. She wanted to make it worth staying for. Meanwhile, I changed too. Before Mara, I had thought love meant being chosen. I thought if someone loved you enough, they would make sacrifices for you. But watching her fight for her own career taught me something different. Love wasn't about being someone's reason. It was about being someone they could choose without losing themselves. The day her Chicago division officially launched, she found me near the elevator. You were right, she said. About what? I don't want to leave. I smiled. I'm glad. She looked at me. Not because of you. I know. Because this is mine. I know. She stepped closer. And maybe because you're here too. That was all she said. Then she walked away. I stood there grinning like an idiot. Denise appeared beside me. You look pathetic. I'm happy. Worse. Months later, on an ordinary Sunday morning, Mara stood in my kitchen holding a coffee mug. We had been dating officially for a while by then. No secrets. No mistletoe. No corporate games. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. I don't like when you leave. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Then I won't. That was how I eventually moved in. Not because she needed me, not because I needed her. Because one ordinary morning, love stopped feeling like something we had to protect from the rest of our lives and started feeling like something that belonged inside them. And somehow, that was more frightening than the kiss. I used to think the hardest moment would be telling the company about Mara and me. I was wrong. The hardest moment came much later, when there was no scandal, no HR meeting, no investor watching us, no snow falling dramatically outside a rooftop door. It came on a Sunday morning when Mara looked at me over a cup of coffee and asked, "Are you happy?" It was such a simple question that I almost laughed. We were living together. Her Chicago division was doing better than anyone expected. I had been promoted. We had figured out the rules. We had survived the awkwardness. We had even survived Denise, discovering that we had a shared grocery list and turning it into a 5-minute comedy routine. Everything was fine. More than fine. But Mara wasn't asking if things were fine. She wanted to know if I was happy. I told her yes. Then I asked why. She shrugged. Because sometimes I still wonder if you stayed because of me. I put down my coffee. Mara, I didn't stay because of you. She looked at me. I stayed because I wanted to. That's what I'm afraid of. Why? Because what if one day you don't? I smiled. Then I'll tell you. She stared at me for a long moment. You're annoyingly honest. You hired me. I deeply regret it. We laughed. That was our relationship by then. Not dramatic, not perfect, real. But the memory of that first night still lived between us. Every December, the mistletoe returned. Every time I saw one in a shop window, I remembered the rooftop. I remembered her telling me that she didn't want our first kiss to belong to anyone else. And I understood why she had said it. Mara had spent most of her career being watched. Executives watched her. Clients watched her. Employees watched her. Investors judged her. People constantly interpreted her decisions. She had learned to protect the private parts of herself by becoming very good at being unreadable. But with me, she didn't need to perform. That was the real intimacy between us. Not the kiss. Not moving in together. Not the romantic dinners. It was the fact that she could be uncertain around me. She could say, I don't know. She could admit she was scared. She could tell me she wanted something without pretending she didn't care whether she got it, and I could do the same. That was why the day the company announced the success of her Chicago division mattered so much. Martin Kell came back. This time, he wasn't asking her to move to New York. He was congratulating her. The department had exceeded projections. Her team had grown. The company had finally realized what she had known all along. Chicago didn't need to become New York. It needed to become Chicago. After the presentation, Martin shook her hand. You were right. Mara smiled. I know. I nearly laughed. Some things never changed. That evening, we went home together. We ordered food. We argued about which movie to watch. Mara pretended she didn't like hot chocolate, even though she always finished mine when she thought I wasn't looking. Eventually, she fell asleep on the couch. I covered her with a blanket and stood there for a moment, thinking about the woman I had first seen as an impossible rule, my boss. 5 years earlier, I would have told myself there was no universe in which Mara Whitfield and Ethan Cole could become a couple without destroying something. Yet here we were. Not because we ignored the rules, we respected them. We changed the circumstances that made the relationship inappropriate. We waited when we needed to wait. We fought for our careers separately. And when the time came, we chose each other freely. That distinction mattered. It mattered to me, it mattered to Mara. And it mattered because our story could have easily become a story about forbidden love. Instead, it became a story about two adults learning that love wasn't an excuse to abandon responsibility. It was a reason to become more responsible. A year after I moved in, we hosted our first Christmas party at our apartment. Denise came, Peter came, even Martin stopped by for an hour. There was music, food, too much wine, and an unreasonable amount of dessert. But there was no velvet bag. Peter had finally been banned from organizing the mistletoe game after HR allegedly described the tradition as a recurring liability concern. Denise claimed responsibility for the new tradition, which involved competitive cookie decorating and rules so complicated that nobody understood them. Mara stood beside me beneath the string lights, her hand inside mine. Every once in a while, someone would glance at us and smile. I didn't mind. This time our relationship wasn't a secret. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a joke. It belonged to us. Later that night, after everyone had left, I was carrying glasses toward the kitchen when I noticed Mara standing beneath the doorway. She was looking up. I followed her gaze. A sprig of mistletoe hung above her head, tied with a red ribbon. I stopped. She looked at me. You know the rules. I laughed. I thought HR banned this. They banned Peter. Important distinction. She smiled. The same smile. Softer now. No danger in it. No fear. Just warmth. I walked toward her. You remember our first one? She asked. Every second. I was terrified. You didn't look terrified. I was very good at pretending. I know. She touched my shirt. And now? I put my hands around her waist. Now I'm terrified of losing you. Her expression changed. You won't. How do you know? She looked at me the way she had looked at me on that rooftop. Only now there was no uncertainty. Because I choose you. That sentence stayed with me. Not, I need you. Not, I can't live without you. Not, I gave everything up for you. She chose me, and I chose her. Again and again. Not because we had to, because we wanted to. I leaned down and kissed her. This time, there was no audience. No champagne, no awkward employees whispering, no investor waiting downstairs, no paper hidden in my hand, no rules we needed to break. Just Mara and me, standing in the home we had built together. When we separated, she smiled against my lips. Still think I'm intimidating? Absolutely, she laughed. Good. I looked around the apartment. The city lights glowed beyond the windows. The kitchen was a mess. There were coffee cups on the counter. One of them had my old raccoon drawing on it. Mara had kept it. Of course she had. I picked it up. You still have this? Obviously. Why? She shrugged. Because I like it. It's terrible. I know. Then why keep it? She looked at me. Because you made it. There are moments in life when you realize that the thing you were afraid of losing was never really the thing you needed to hold on to. I had been afraid of losing my job. Mara had been afraid of losing her independence. We had both been afraid of what other people would say, but none of those things were what mattered. What mattered was that we had learned to make room for each other without shrinking ourselves. That was the part I never understood when I was 26 and staring at my boss across a dark office. I thought love was supposed to feel like losing control. With Mara, love felt like finally having the courage to take control of the parts of my life that actually belonged to me. She taught me that. I like to think I taught her something too. Maybe that not every decision has to be made alone. Maybe that vulnerability isn't weakness. Maybe that sometimes the person who challenges you most is also the person who sees you most clearly. I don't know. I never asked her. I probably should. But that night, under the mistletoe, I didn't need an explanation. I only needed her hand in mine. People often ask me when I knew I loved Mara. I usually give them a simple answer, because the real one takes too long. I tell them it was the night we kissed on the rooftop. It's a good answer. It's romantic. It gives the story a clear moment. It makes people smile. But it's not completely true. The truth is, I don't know exactly when I fell in love with her. Maybe it happened at 11:48 p.m., when she laughed at my terrible joke in an empty office. Maybe it happened when she told me I needed sleep. Maybe it happened when I realized she remembered the little things I said. Maybe it happened when she kept those ridiculous coffee cups. Maybe it happened on the rooftop when snow landed on her hair and she admitted she wanted to kiss me. Or maybe love doesn't happen at one moment at all. Maybe it accumulates quietly until one day you look back and realize there is no version of your life that makes sense without the person standing beside you. I think that's what happened to me. And if I had to choose one moment that explains everything, I would choose the morning she told me she didn't like when I left. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music, no snow, no mistletoe. She was wearing an old sweatshirt, holding a coffee mug, and standing barefoot in our kitchen. She looked tired, happy, real. I don't like when you leave, she said. I asked, do you want me to stay? She said, yes. So I did. That's the whole story. At least, that's the ending. The beginning was much messier. The beginning was a rule. Don't fall for your boss. Don't cross the line. Don't let attraction interfere with judgment. Don't become the story people whisper about at the office. And for a while, I believed following those rules would keep me safe. They didn't. They only kept me from admitting what was already happening. But there was another rule we learned later. If you love someone, don't make them responsible for your happiness. Mara didn't become my entire life. I didn't become hers. We remained two people with careers, ambitions, friends, arguments, bad habits, and separate dreams. We just happened to build a life that included each other. That's why I don't think our story is really about a boss falling for an employee. That's just the setup. So, now, the real story is about two people trying to figure out whether love can survive when life refuses to become simple. We had to make choices. Mara had to choose Chicago or New York. I had to decide whether I could support her without quietly hoping she'd choose me. We had to deal with HR. We had to accept that our relationship could affect how people viewed our work. We had to make sure neither of us was using the other as an excuse to avoid difficult decisions. None of that was glamorous. Most of love isn't. Love is deciding who buys groceries. Love is remembering that someone hates cilantro. Love is sitting through a terrible movie because they love it. Love is listening when you're tired. Love is apologizing when you're wrong. Love is asking, "Are you okay?" and actually waiting for the answer. Love is sometimes letting someone go upstairs first because you know they need space. And sometimes love is standing under a ridiculous sprig of mistletoe 1 year after your first kiss and realizing that the thing that once frightened you no longer has any power over you. That's where I am now. I still work in the same industry. Mara still scares junior executives with one raised eyebrow. Denise still knows more about our relationship than she should. Peter still believes every corporate event needs some kind of unnecessary tradition. And I still make terrible jokes. The difference is that now, when I look across a room and see Mara, I don't wonder whether I should be looking. I know I can. She looks back. Sometimes she smiles. Sometimes she rolls her eyes. Sometimes she mouths, "Stop staring." And sometimes I remember the woman she was that night on the rooftop, the woman who was brave enough to admit she didn't know what would happen next. I think that's what made me fall in love with her. Not her confidence, not her intelligence, not her beauty. It was the rare moments when all of those things disappeared and I could see the person underneath them, the woman who was scared of choosing wrong, the woman who cared more deeply than she wanted people to know, the woman who kept paper cups because throwing them away somehow felt wrong, the woman who once told me she didn't want our first kiss to belong to everyone else. Years later, I understand exactly what she meant. Some moments are supposed to belong to the people who live them. Our first kiss belonged to us. The decision to stay in Chicago belonged to Mara. The decision to wait belonged to me. The decision to move in together belonged to both of us. And every morning after that belonged to us too. If you ask me whether I would change anything, I honestly don't know. I might have waited longer before falling for her. I might have protected myself better. I might have chosen a safer path. But then I remember the rooftop. I remember her standing in the snow. I remember her looking at me and saying that tomorrow we'd deal with everything like adults. She was right. We did. And that's why the story didn't end with the kiss. It began there. The kiss was only the moment we stopped pretending. Everything afterward was a choice. We chose honesty. We chose patience. We chose our careers. We chose boundaries. We chose each other. And we kept choosing each other, even after the excitement faded and ordinary life arrived. That's the part nobody tells you about romance. The first kiss gets all the attention, but the real love begins afterward. It begins when the lights come back on. It begins when you have to answer emails the next morning. It begins when HR sends paperwork. It begins when the person you love has an opportunity that might take them away. It begins when you have to say, "I want you to stay, but I won't ask you to give up your dream for me." It begins when they look at you and say, "I know." And then, somehow, they choose you anyway. A year after our first Christmas together, I found Mara standing in the kitchen beneath another sprig of mistletoe. The ribbon was red. The apartment was quiet. The city glowed through the windows. She looked at me and smiled. "You know the rules." I walked toward her. I remember. She put her hand against my chest. "Good." I wrapped my arms around her waist. "Are you sure?" She smiled. "Ethan, after everything we've been through, you're still asking?" "I'm trying to be respectful." "You're terrible at it." I laughed. Then I kissed her. And as I held her there, I realized that the woman who had once been my boss was now simply the woman I loved. No title, no hierarchy, no office, no rules. Just Mara. Just me. Just us. And maybe that's the real reason I remember that first Christmas so clearly. Not because my boss kissed me. Not because I broke a rule. Not because everyone in that room thought they were watching a joke. I remember it because that was the night I learned that some of the biggest changes in your life don't arrive with a warning. Sometimes they walk quietly into an empty office at 11:48 p.m. Sometimes they laugh at your stupid joke. Sometimes they keep a coffee cup you thought they threw away. Sometimes they stand under a branch of mistletoe and tell you there is a rule you both know you're going to have to take seriously. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the person standing on the other side of that rule becomes the person standing beside you when all the rules stop mattering. I used to think that night changed our relationship. Now I know it changed much more than that. It changed the way I understood love. It changed the way I understood ambition. It changed the way I understood choice. And most importantly, it changed the way I understood what it means to stay. You don't stay because someone needs you to. You don't stay because you're afraid of leaving. You stay because, after seeing every possible road in front of you, you look at the person beside you and decide that this is the road you want. Mara chose Chicago. I chose her. And years later, she still chooses me. That's all I ever wanted. Not a perfect love story, just a real one. One where two people keep choosing each other after the story stops being exciting. One where the kiss is only the beginning. One where the rules don't disappear because love arrives. They simply become something you understand differently. And if you ever find yourself standing beneath a sprig of mistletoe with someone you were never supposed to fall for, remember this. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is pretend you don't feel what you feel. But the most beautiful thing you can do is make sure that when you finally choose love, You choose it honestly, responsibly, and freely. That was what Mara gave me. That was what I gave her. And that was how the night that changed our relationship became the night that changed my entire life. The problem with telling someone you can wait is that the sentence sounds much easier than the reality. When Mara told me that Priya would supervise my projects for the next quarter, I thought 3 months sounded reasonable. 90 days, 12 weeks, 1 season. I had waited longer for a client to approve a logo. I had waited 6 months for a promotion that never came. Surely I could wait 3 months before taking the woman I had kissed on a rooftop out to dinner. What I hadn't considered was that waiting becomes completely different when you know exactly what you're waiting for. The next morning, everything at Haven and Low looked normal, which somehow made it worse. People were answering emails, designers were arguing about fonts, the printer was making the same terrible grinding noise it had made for years, and someone from finance had left half a muffin beside the coffee machine. Nobody knew that my entire emotional life had changed in less than 24 hours. Or at least, nobody officially knew. Denise knew. Denise always knew. She walked past my desk at 9:05, dropped a folder beside my keyboard, and whispered, 3 months. I looked up. What? That's how long you have to wait. How do you know that? You have the face of a man who has just been sentenced to 3 months. I don't have that face. She stared at me. You absolutely have that face. I opened the folder. It contained nothing except a blank sheet of paper. Did you seriously make a fake file just to annoy me? Yes. She walked away. I couldn't even be angry. The next few weeks became an exercise in self-control. Mara and I didn't stop talking. We couldn't. We worked in the same department, but the nature of our conversations changed. Every email became carefully written. Every meeting included Priya. Every time Mara needed to discuss one of my projects, she made sure someone else was present. At first, it felt artificial. Then I realized why she was doing it. She wasn't trying to distance herself from me. She was creating a path toward us that didn't depend on secrecy. That distinction mattered. One Tuesday afternoon, Priya called me into a conference room. I want to talk about Mara. My stomach dropped. Is something wrong? No, that's the point. Priya opened a folder. She has been very clear that your work should be evaluated independently. I appreciate that. She also told me that if you ever think she's treating you differently, you should tell me. I almost laughed. She really planned for everything. Priya smiled. Mara plans for everything. She paused. But, Ethan, I want you to understand something. This arrangement isn't punishment. It's protection. For whom? Both of you. I nodded. That afternoon, I walked past Mara's office. Her door was open. She was staring at a wall of printed concepts, one hand resting against her chin. She looked exhausted. I wanted to walk in. Instead, I kept walking. She looked up anyway. Our eyes met. For 1 second, she smiled. Then she returned to work. It was such a small moment that nobody else would have noticed it. But I carried it with me for the rest of the day. The first month was the hardest. The second month was different. By then, we had developed a rhythm. We didn't touch. We didn't flirt in the office. We didn't meet alone. But we began learning things about each other through distance. I discovered that Mara got nervous before presentations, even though she never looked nervous. I discovered that she skipped lunch whenever a project became difficult. I discovered that she hated elevators when they were crowded, but loved writing alone. She discovered that I listened to the same 3 songs whenever I was designing. She discovered that I talked to myself when I was frustrated. She discovered that I had a habit of buying coffee for other people and forgetting to buy one for myself. You're ridiculous, she told me one afternoon. That's not new information. You need to take care of yourself. You sound like you. That's because I'm right. I smiled. You missed me. She looked around to make sure nobody was listening. Don't make this difficult. I'm trying. You're failing. She walked away before I could answer. I watched her disappear around the corner and realized something strange. Waiting wasn't making my feelings weaker. It was making them clearer. Before the rooftop, attraction had been confusing. After the rooftop, the kiss had made everything feel urgent. But during those 3 months, something deeper began forming. I stopped thinking about what Mara looked like when she kissed me. I started thinking about what she needed when she was tired. I stopped wondering whether she wanted me. I started wondering whether she was happy. That was when I understood that what I felt wasn't simply desire. It was love. The realization frightened me, because love made the stakes much higher. Then came Martin's second visit. He arrived on a Thursday morning with 2 lawyers and a folder thick enough to contain a small country's constitution. He asked Mara to reconsider New York. This time, the offer was even bigger. More money, more authority, a larger team, her own office, a title that would put her directly under the global creative board. Everyone expected her to accept. I did too. Not because I wanted her to leave, but because I knew what the offer meant. It was the kind of opportunity people spent years trying to create. When she told me about it, we were standing on opposite sides of the hallway. Priya was 20 feet away. The office was full of people. We couldn't have a private conversation, so Mara simply said, "They increased the offer." I nodded. "Congratulations." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not what I wanted you to say." "What did you want?" "I don't know." I looked at her. "Then figure that out without me." She stared at me for a moment. "You really mean that?" "Yes, even if it means New York?" My chest tightened. "Even then," she looked almost hurt. "You're very good at pretending not to care." "I'm not pretending." "Then why does it look like you're saying goodbye?" Because I was terrified, I thought. Because I had no right to ask her to sacrifice a career-defining opportunity for me. Because if she chose New York, I wanted to know that she chose it because she wanted it, not because she felt guilty. But I couldn't say all of that in the hallway. So I said, "Because I care enough not to make your decision for you." Her expression softened. "That's the most frustrating thing about you. I get that a lot." She walked away. That night, I stayed late. Not because of work. I just couldn't bring myself to go home. Around 10:30, Priya found me. "You know she turned down the offer." I looked up. "What?" 10:30. "She turned it down this afternoon." My heart stopped. "She did?" Priya nodded. "She said Chicago is where she wants to build something." I didn't celebrate. Not immediately. Instead, I asked, "Are you sure she didn't turn it down because of me?" Priya gave me a look I had seen before. The same look Denise used when she thought I was being stupid. "Ethan, if you knew Mara at all, you'd know she doesn't turn down anything because somebody else tells her to." That was true. Mara didn't choose Chicago because of me. She chose it because she had finally realized that the thing she wanted wasn't New York. It was autonomy. She wanted to build something of her own. And once I understood that, I felt proud rather than relieved. The third month passed faster. Suddenly, the date on the HR agreement was approaching. I started thinking about what our first official date should look like. I considered a restaurant. Too formal. A movie. Too impersonal. A rooftop. Too obvious. The diner, where we'd gone after the Christmas party. Too sentimental. Then I remembered something Mara had said months earlier. She wanted to go somewhere where nobody knew her. Somewhere she could sit without being Mara Whitfield, creative director. So I planned something simple. A small restaurant on the edge of the city. No executives, no clients, no employees, no cameras, just us. On the morning the quarter ended, Mara sent me an email. Subject: Thursday. The body contained one sentence. "If you are still interested, dinner at 7. I stared at the screen for almost a full minute. Then I replied, "I have reviewed the proposal and believe the project has significant potential." 3 dots appeared. Then her reply came. "You're impossible." I smiled. 7 o'clock. That evening, I arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early. Mara arrived at exactly 7. She wore a simple black dress and a dark coat. No corporate blazer, no laptop, no folder, no phone in her hand. For the first time, I saw her without any visible reminder of work. She walked toward me slowly. "Hi," she said. "Hi. This feels strange." "Good strange?" "Very." We sat down. For the first 15 minutes, neither of us knew how to behave. We were so used to rules that having none felt almost suspicious. Finally, Mara laughed. "We're terrible at this." "At dating?" "At being normal." "I told you I didn't want normal." She smiled. I remember. Dinner lasted 3 hours. We talked about everything except work. Her childhood. My family. Her mother's death. My fear of failure. The first time she realized she wanted to lead. The first time I realized I wanted to design for a living. When we left the restaurant, snow had started falling again. Mara looked up at the sky. "You know," she said, "I think Chicago is trying to make our relationship unbearably cinematic. I think Chicago has excellent timing." She slipped her hand into mine. I miss this. Holding hands? Not having to think about whether someone is watching. I squeezed her fingers. No one gets to decide what this means anymore. She looked at me. We do. And that was the first time our relationship truly felt like ours. Not a secret, not a violation, not a workplace complication. A choice. Ours. The first few months of dating Mara outside the office taught me something I hadn't expected. Falling in love with someone is exciting. Learning how to live with them is work. Not bad work, just real work. Mara and I discovered very quickly that we were good at the dramatic parts. We could handle a rooftop kiss in the snow. We could survive an investor meeting. We could negotiate around HR. We could stare down a room full of executives. What we weren't prepared for was grocery shopping together. Our first argument was about tomatoes. I wanted to buy 6. Mara wanted 2. I said 6 was more efficient. She said 6 would rot. I said we could make sauce. She said we weren't making sauce. Somehow, 20 minutes later, we were standing in the produce aisle, arguing like a married couple who had been doing this for 30 years. You always overestimate how much food we need, she said. You always underestimate how hungry I am. That's because you eat like a 16-year-old after football practice. That's an insult. It's an observation. You're the creative director now? She smiled. No, but I'm right. I bought 4 tomatoes. She bought 2. We compromised at 6. That became the pattern. Not agreement. Compromise. We learned each other's habits. Mara worked late when she was anxious. I became quiet when I was overwhelmed. She needed space after difficult meetings. I needed conversation. Sometimes we got it wrong. Sometimes one of us said something we didn't mean. But we learned to come back. That mattered more than being right. Her Chicago division grew faster than expected. The company approved the 2 senior hires she had requested. She hired people who challenged her instead of people who simply agreed with her. I watched her build a team from the ground up. She stopped trying to control every detail. She learned to delegate. She started taking weekends off. Sometimes I would find her sitting on the couch with no laptop, staring at nothing. "What are you doing?" I'd ask. "Nothing. Are you okay?" "I'm practicing." Practicing what? Doing nothing without feeling guilty. I loved those moments. Not because she was doing nothing. Because she was finally learning that she didn't have to earn rest. One evening, months after our first official date, I came home and found her standing in the kitchen holding one of my old coffee cups. The raccoon drawing was still there. She looked at it and laughed. "You really thought this was funny?" "I still do. It's terrible. You kept it. I kept all of them." She opened a cabinet. Inside were several more. "Why?" I asked. She shrugged. "Because they remind me of when I first started noticing you." I leaned against the counter. "When was that?" "You really want to know?" "Yes." She smiled. "The first time you disagreed with me in a meeting." I laughed. "That's romantic. You were the only person in the room who wasn't trying to impress me." She looked down at the cup. "You were just trying to solve the problem. I was terrified of you." "I know. You knew?" "Ethan, everyone was terrified of me." "Not everyone. You were." "Okay, fine." She smiled. "But you still spoke." "Because the headline was terrible." Her eyes widened. "You still think that?" "Absolutely." She laughed. Then she put the cup down and stepped closer. "That's why I noticed you." I touched her hand. "And when did you know?" She thought for a moment. "I don't know if there was one moment." "That's cheating." "It's true." She looked at me. "Maybe it was that night in the office when you made me laugh." "The raccoon?" "The raccoon." I smiled. "I knew you were in trouble when you laughed." "I was. And you kept the cup." "I did." We stood there quietly. It was such an ordinary moment that it almost felt more intimate than our first kiss. That's when I realized love had changed shape. At first, love had been a storm. Everything had felt urgent. Every look mattered. Every message mattered. Every decision carried consequences. Now love was quieter. It lived in the kitchen. It lived in grocery lists and coffee cups. It lived in the way Mara left the hallway light on when she knew I'd be home late. It lived in the way I charged her phone when she forgot. It lived in the way we knew when not to speak. And yet, there were still difficult days. One of the hardest came when Martin returned to Chicago for a company review. He asked to meet with Mara privately. She came home that night exhausted. I could tell something was wrong. "What happened?" I asked. She took off her coat. "They want me on the global board." I smiled. "That's huge. It's in New York." The smile disappeared from my face. "Oh." She looked at me. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Don't become careful." "I'm not." "You are." She sat down. "This is different from before." How? Before, I was afraid of leaving. Now, I'm afraid of staying. That sentence stayed with me. I sat beside her. Why? Because I don't want my whole identity to become Chicago creative director. I don't want to build one thing and spend the rest of my career protecting it. I nodded slowly. So, what do you want? I don't know. Then we figure it out. She looked at me. Together? Yes. Without you sacrificing anything? Without either of us sacrificing anything we don't want to lose. She leaned against my shoulder. You make that sound easy. It's not. Then why say it? Because I don't want us to become afraid of difficult choices just because we're in love. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, what if I go? I took a breath. Then we figure out how to do long distance. What if you hate it? Then I'll tell you. What if I hate it? Then you tell me. What if it changes us? I looked at her. Everything changes us. That's not a reason to stop living. She closed her eyes. I love you. I smiled. I know. She opened her eyes. That's all you're going to say? No. I love you too. Better. We didn't solve the problem that night. We didn't need to. The point wasn't always solving things immediately. Sometimes the point was knowing that you could face the uncertainty together. A month later, Mara flew to New York for a 3-day board meeting. I stayed in Chicago. It was the first time we'd spent more than 2 nights apart since she moved in. I thought I'd be fine. I wasn't. The apartment felt wrong without her. Her shoes weren't by the door. Her coffee mug wasn't beside the sink. Nobody complained when I left the kitchen light on. On the second night, my phone buzzed. I miss you. I smiled. I miss you too. Another message arrived. I hate this city. I laughed. You haven't even finished the meeting. That's not the problem. What's the problem? It isn't Chicago. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed, come home. She replied, I will. She did. When she returned, she didn't announce a decision. She just walked through the door, dropped her suitcase, and hugged me. We stood there for a long time. Finally, she whispered, I don't want New York. Are you sure? Yes. Because of me? No. She pulled away and looked directly into my eyes. Because I went there and realized something. I don't want the bigger office. I don't want the bigger title. I want the work. And I want to come home to you when the work is finished. I didn't say anything. I just held her. She smiled. You're supposed to say something. I'm trying not to ruin the moment. Too late. She kissed me. And that was when I understood the difference between being someone's reason and being someone's home. I wasn't the reason Mara stayed. I was part of the life she wanted to return to. There was a huge difference. Years earlier, I had been afraid that loving her would mean asking her to choose between me and her ambition. But real love didn't ask that. Real love made room for both. The following Christmas, we hosted a small party at our apartment. Denise came. Priya came. Peter arrived late, carrying a bottle of wine and apologizing for the mistletoe tradition as though he had personally committed a crime. I have learned, he announced. HR has educated me. Denise laughed. That's terrifying. The evening was warm and loud. People talked. Music played. Mara stood beside me in the kitchen, watching everyone enjoy themselves. At one point, she looked up. I followed her eyes. Hanging above the doorway was a small sprig of mistletoe. I smiled. Did you put that there? Maybe. You? Maybe. After everything? Especially after everything. I stepped closer. You know the rules? She smiled. I know. HR? I don't work for you. Good point. And you don't work for me. Also true. So? I put my hands around her waist. So I think we're finally allowed. She looked at me for a moment. No. I raised an eyebrow. No? We're not allowed. She smiled. We're choosing. That word stopped me. Choosing. It was the same word that had carried us through everything. She chose Chicago. I chose patience. We chose honesty. We chose boundaries. We chose to wait. We chose each other. And now, standing beneath the same symbol that had once represented embarrassment and uncertainty, we chose again. I kissed her. There were no cheers this time. No one interrupted. No one laughed. Nobody was waiting for a performance. It was simply Mara and me. When we pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine. Remember the first night? She whispered. Every second. I was terrified. You hid it well. I wasn't terrified of the kiss. What were you terrified of? She looked at me. That you would matter. I felt my chest tighten. And now? Now you do. She kissed me again. That was the moment I finally understood what our story had really been about. It wasn't about a boss and an employee. It wasn't about a Christmas party. It wasn't about a forbidden kiss. It wasn't even about New York versus Chicago. It was about two people learning that love doesn't mean surrendering yourself to another person. It means becoming more honest about who you are, while giving someone else the freedom to do the same. Mara never became less ambitious because of me. I never became less independent because of her. We simply stopped treating independence and intimacy like enemies. We learned that you can love someone deeply without owning their future. You can support someone's dreams without disappearing into them. You can ask someone to stay without demanding that they give up everything else. And you can wait for someone without putting your life on hold. Looking back, I think that's why the rooftop kiss mattered so much. It wasn't because it was romantic. It was because Mara had said, in her own way, that she wanted the first kiss to belong to us. She was right. The world had already taken enough from both of us, our careers, our time, our attention, our identities. But that moment was ours. And so was everything that came after. People sometimes ask me whether I would do anything differently if I could go back to that Christmas party. The honest answer is yes. I would probably eat before drinking champagne. I would avoid Peter's mistletoe tradition entirely. I would tell Denise to stop watching me. I would probably fix my scarf before leaving the house. And most importantly, I would stop pretending that I wasn't already in love with Mara. But I wouldn't change the kiss. Not because it was perfect. It wasn't. It was complicated. It created problems. It forced us to confront questions neither of us wanted to answer. It put our careers under a microscope. It made us uncomfortable. It made us wait. But sometimes, the thing that changes your life isn't supposed to be easy. Sometimes it is supposed to force you to become the person capable of living the life you actually want. Before Mara, I thought love was something that happened after everything else had been figured out. Career first. Stability first. Confidence first. Then love would arrive when you were ready. Mara taught me that nobody is ever completely ready. You simply decide whether the person in front of you is worth being honest for. That was what the rooftop really gave me. Honesty. She didn't promise me forever. I didn't promise her that I would never be afraid. She simply admitted that she wanted me to kiss her. I admitted that I wanted to kiss her. Then, we dealt with the consequences like adults. That's not the version of romance people usually tell stories about. There are no dramatic airport scenes. No one runs through a train station. Nobody quits their job in the rain. Instead, there are emails, HR meetings, awkward hallway conversations, difficult choices, long nights, patience, compromise, and eventually, there is a kitchen where two people are arguing about tomatoes. That's real love. It isn't less romantic because it is ordinary. I think it is more romantic because it survives ordinary life. Mara and I still disagree. We still annoy each other. She still thinks my coffee is too sweet. I still think she owns too many black coats. She still works too late sometimes. I still forget to buy groceries. But when she walks through the door, I still look up. When she laughs, I still listen. When she reaches for my hand, I still feel that small shock I felt the first time she touched my wrist on the rooftop. Maybe that's what love is after all. Not constantly feeling overwhelmed. Not needing fireworks every day. Just recognizing the person beside you, again and again, even after you've seen them tired, angry, sick, stressed, distracted, stubborn, imperfect, and completely ordinary. And still thinking, there you are. I think back to the man I was at 26. He believed the safest way to live was to create rules. Don't fall for your boss. Don't get involved at work. Don't let emotions interfere with judgment. Don't risk your career. Don't trust someone too quickly. Those rules weren't wrong. They protected me for a long time. But eventually, I learned something more important. Rules can keep you safe. They cannot tell you what to do with your heart. That part requires judgment. It requires courage. It requires responsibility. And sometimes, it requires waiting. Mara once told me she was afraid of becoming someone whose entire life was controlled by work. I think I was afraid of becoming someone whose entire life was controlled by fear. She taught me how to choose. I taught her, I hope, that choosing someone doesn't mean losing yourself. Together, we learned that the best relationships don't demand that one person becomes smaller so the other can grow. They make both people larger, more honest, more patient, more courageous, more themselves. Years later, I still have that first coffee cup, the one with the ridiculous raccoon drawing. It's sitting on a shelf in our kitchen. The ink has faded slightly. There's a crack, near the handle. Mara says I should throw it away. I refuse. She pretends to be annoyed, but sometimes I catch her looking at it. I know why. It reminds us of the people we were before we knew what we were becoming. It reminds us of a time when a simple coffee cup could carry a message neither of us was brave enough to say aloud. It reminds us that love doesn't always arrive as a grand declaration. Sometimes it arrives as a person handing you coffee and telling you to eat something because you look exhausted. Sometimes it arrives as a joke at 11:48 p.m. Sometimes it arrives as a handwritten note hidden in your hand beneath a sprig of mistletoe. And sometimes it arrives in the form of a woman standing in the snow saying, "I don't want our first kiss to belong to them." I didn't know it then, but she wasn't talking only about the people downstairs. She was talking about everyone who had ever told her what her life should look like. The board, the investors, the executives, the expectations, the people who thought success had a specific address. She was saying that, for once, she wanted something to belong to her. I'm grateful that she let me be part of that. More grateful than I know how to explain. So, if you ask me what happened that night, I could tell you about the Christmas party. I could tell you about Peter's ridiculous mistletoe game. I could tell you about the note. I could tell you about the rooftop. I could tell you about the snow. I could tell you about the diner, and the pancakes, and the walk home. I could tell you about the HR email the next morning and the meeting with Martin Kell and the 3 months we spent waiting. I could tell you about Chicago. I could tell you about New York. I could tell you about the day Mara chose her career on her own terms. I could tell you about the first official date and the first argument over tomatoes and the first Christmas party we hosted together. But if I had to reduce the entire story to one sentence, I would say this. That night changed our relationship because it forced us to stop pretending. We stopped pretending that attraction wasn't there. We stopped pretending that fear was the same thing as wisdom. We stopped pretending that ambition and love couldn't coexist. We stopped pretending that choosing someone meant giving up yourself. Most importantly, we stopped pretending that we didn't have a choice. We did. Every step of the way, we did. And that's why I don't think the most important part of our story was the kiss. The kiss was easy. The difficult part came afterward. The difficult part was waking up the next morning and deciding to handle what we'd started responsibly. The difficult part was waiting. The difficult part was letting Mara make her own career decision without trying to influence her. The difficult part was letting her see that I could love her without needing to possess her future. The difficult part was allowing myself to trust that if she chose me, it would be because she wanted to, not because I had asked her to. And when she finally did choose me, that choice meant more because she was free to choose something else. That's the part I will always remember. Not that she stayed, that she could have left, not that she loved me, that she loved herself enough to make the decision honestly, not that we never struggled, that we kept coming back to the same table and talking, not that our story became perfect, that it became real. The night we kissed, I thought everything had changed. I was right. But I misunderstood what had changed. It wasn't my job. It wasn't Mara's career. It wasn't Chicago. It wasn't even our relationship. The biggest change happened inside me. I stopped asking, how do I protect myself from losing this? And started asking, how do I build something worthy of keeping? That question changed everything. And years later, when Mara and I stand under the mistletoe, I don't think about the room full of people who were waiting for a spectacle. I don't think about Peter's stupid velvet bag. I don't think about HR. I don't think about Martin. I think about the woman who stood beside me on a rooftop in the snow and gave me the courage to be honest. Then she usually says something sarcastic, because apparently sincerity makes her uncomfortable. I usually make a joke because apparently vulnerability makes me uncomfortable too. Then she reaches for my hand. And I know that whatever happens next, whatever city we live in, whatever title appears on her office door, whatever career opportunity comes next, whatever argument we have over groceries, whatever ridiculous problem life puts in front of us, I want to face it with her. Not because I need her to complete me, not because she needs me to save her, not because either of us owes the other a sacrifice, because, after everything, we still choose each other. And that is the part of the story I would never change.